At Strings by Mail, we have the strings you need to hit all the right notes. Choose from over 6,000 strings from 75 manufacturers. Use our string filter or call one of our expert players to help find your perfect set. Your music, your strings delivered fast. Strings by Mail.
Hi, it's Rick from Garrett Park Guitars, and we are proud to sponsor this podcast. You can find us on the web at gpguitars.com. We buy everything from large collections down to 1 and 2 pieces.
Hello, and welcome to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. I'm your host, Ram Tuli. This podcast is about the joy of guitar. That includes buying guitars, selling guitars, collecting guitars. We're talking vintage guitars, new guitars, used guitars, pre-war, flat tops, electric Spanish arch tops, custom shop guitars, limited edition guitars, basses, amps, effect pedals, lap steels, mandolins, banjo. If it has strings, we're going to talk about it. I spent most of my life studying the vintage guitar market. It's truly something I love and I'm passionate about. I can talk guitars all day, and I'm going to. Hey, hello, everybody. This is Ram Tuli here. I'm talking with the nicest guy in the vintage guitar business, Rick Hogue from Garrett Park Guitars in Annapolis, Maryland. How you doing, Rick?
I'm well, Bill. How you doing, man?
Good
to talk to you.
You know, you've been associated with the Vintage Guitar Guide, well, actually Vintage Guitar Magazine, since the 80s, right? From the very beginning.
Yeah, and I remember being at an Arlington show with the Migos, and Dave Crocker made an announcement that there was a new magazine, and I think that Alan was there, and a few of us went over and kind of gathered around while they talked about the magazine. Gosh, I may have been 85 or 86.
Right, very beginning when it was I think black. It was like a black and white, big newsprint.
Yeah, it was. It was a large magazine. Nothing like the outstanding magazine that you guys put out now.
Oh, I know. I love watching the magazine evolve. I love watching the price guide evolve. And you've been in part of that price guide since the beginning. I know that you provided a lot of the photographs for the earliest versions. And, you know, this price guide is now 2001. I think it was the first dated price guide. So it's been fun. And you've always been very helpful to me. Even when I wasn't working for the price guide, when I was writing my books, you always helped me with that stuff. And it's just been a pleasure. And I love your store. I love what you've done there. And when did you actually open Garrett Park?
So I opened as a hobby. It was just kind of a side hustle in 1981. I did that as I became acquainted with a guy named Cesar Diaz. He was my neighbor. Cesar was very heavily involved in restoration of guitars and primarily amplifiers. And he kind of injected me with the vintage bug, and I wanted a pre-CBS Telecaster, so I went over to Southworth Guitars on MacArthur Boulevard, one of the OGs around here, and I went in, and he had a 63 Olympic White Tele for $550, and I had set aside $350, and, obviously it wasn't coming down that much, so in sort of desperation, I left with a 64 Jaguar. I kept looking in the paper to see if I could find a Tele. There was a guy who had one and an amp. Why are you selling them? He wanted to join a surf band, so I swapped him straight across. I refinished the Tele, sold it for $350, sold the amp for $200, and I had the $550, and I went back and bought the 63 Olympic White Tele, which subsequently my upstairs neighbor who I jammed with liked it and bought it for me for $850, and I was off to the races.
You realize right then and there is something about these old guitars.
And I never put any more money into it, Bill, for at least 10 years. It just compounded on that original $350.
Yep.
And, so then I was in medical sales, and after 10 years of having fun doing it and doing medical sales, I decided that this was a career for me. 91, I opened my own business.
And you've always been in Annapolis then?
Kind of. I mean, when I started, Garrett Park is Washington, D.C. suburb, and I'd lived in Kensington. I went up to the Kensington post office to get a P.O. box, and they said, we're sold out, but Garrett Park has them. I thought, well, wow, that sounds like a great name for a store. So I drove down to Garrett Park and got a P.O. box. And my job, I got promoted in my job, and I moved to Atlanta. And for about a year, I was in Atlanta. And after that, I moved back out to Annapolis, Maryland. I've been here ever since.
Yep.
So I opened my first brick and mortar store in 91.
And it's the same location, or you moved from it?
No, I've had a couple locations. And the one we're in now, I think it's been 14 years we've been here.
You know, I used to live in Maryland. I think I always talked about this. 75% of my kids were born up in Havre de Grace, in the very same room that Cal Ripken Jr. was born in.
Oh, wow.
We moved from Harford County probably 2002 when I started the business here in Phoenix. When I close my eyes and have dreams, I'm still driving around in Harford County, Growing up in the D.C. area, you probably saw Danny Gatton and Roy Buchanan.
Oh, yeah.
And you probably saw all those guys. I never really got to see those guys because I was a working man. I wasn't even really playing guitar.
When I was getting involved in this, I was heavily involved with a guy named Cesar Diaz. And Cesar would go, and I would go see those local bands all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We went to see Gatton, Stevie Ray. He met Stevie Ray. I did not get to meet him and later worked with him, but Cesar was sitting in the psychedelic Bethesda, Maryland, watching the Blind Boys of Alabama, and Bob Dylan came in and sat down, and that's how they established a relationship. Yeah, I got to see a lot of those great, local D.C. bands back in the day.
And Cesar, his mods for Stevie Ray Vaughan are just legendary.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to probably do an amp show that talks about that later, further down the line. Just, because people buy that black Vivaverb and they're like, it doesn't sound like that. I'm like, yeah.
I sold that to Stevie. I sold that and a Marshall when he was doing In Step. Cesar called me and said, hey, we're looking for some amps. And I've sold those 2 amps to him for that session.
They were unmodified until he got them?
Correct.
And then, do you know what he did? I know it's a secret.
No.
You don't know what he did to him?
No, I try to stay away from amps.
Yeah, well.
I got shocked one time by a 10-tone reverb, and I'm like, that's enough for me.
Yeah, that's like for me, too. I didn't realize you had to maintain these old.
Right, yeah.
Well, that's good. I love Garrett Park. When it comes to the price guide, Garrett Park definitely helps me. They always send me reports, what they sell and everything. But the nicest thing is that when you guys take a picture of your guitar, it's always got the same background. And you can tell, you see this picture show up again and again, and it's not you guys selling it. And you're like, okay, there's something, it looks like you took it on the front porch of a Cracker Barrel kind of thing with the wood paneling in the back there. And it probably drives you nuts to see somebody taking your picture and selling something on one of these online auction type.
Well, I've also noticed that some other dealers are starting to use our same background. So I thought maybe I'll change it to something a little more obscure.
You could do the Indian blanket, but that's already been taken.
Yeah, that's been done.
I think I called Elliot one time and said, hey, how much was the blanket?
Yeah, right.
I think he's got one of the largest collections. He's got collections of everything, but Native American blankets is one of them. Isn't it?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so I remember just as a joke, I was going to call it, I don't care about the guitar, I want the blanket.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the vintage guitar market right now. People always ask you, what's going on? What's going on? And I say, well, it's holding. Last year, we jumped quickly, and beginning of this year, we kind of kept moving up. But as we go into the summer, which is normal, they call them the doldrums of summer, things start holding steady. Is that what you guys are seeing? The price is just kind of holding now.
Yeah, the pandemic for us was really a boon. I'm sure a lot of dealers said the same thing, that people had the government spending money. They're at home on their computer and nobody watching them. They're aware of their own mortality, and things all of a sudden become a lot more desirable to them, and people were buying stuff.
Yep.
That really continued well into 22 and probably 23.
Right.
Last year, it kind of slowed down some, but not terribly for us.
Right. Well, you've seen that this year, Gibson flat tops and Martin flat tops just kept moving, I guess, because they were slower out of the starting gate in the 21 start. But man, it's like they kept going. And now I'm starting to see, everything's starting to slow down a little bit. This is a summer type thing. But we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that the COVID thing did is that the sweet spot, guitar dealers all have the sweet spot. That sweet spot dropped from $2,500 down to about $1,200. And that was because that's what the check was. Right? People were getting the check for $1,200. Well, guitars that sold in the $1,200 were selling. And the sweet spot is still there. It's still about $1,200 to about $3,500. Like this show, I think I want to focus on guitars that are just above that sweet spot. And those are the guitars. I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of potential energy in these. When somebody does a PhD dissertation, they say 80% of the effort is for that last 20%. And that's, for me, 89, almost 90% of the guitars that are listed in the Vintage Guide are listed under 10K. So that's where all my work is, really is, it's easy to get the blue chip numbers because, there's dealers dedicated to that. My work is spread out, trying to get these under 10K values, to narrow them down and pinpoint them. And, so 77% is under 5K, but between 5K and 10K, that's about 12% of that book. I think that's kind of like where the most excitement is right now, because you think about, gosh, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could have bought that Les Paul Jr. for $4,500. Now it's $12,000. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that you could get now for $4,500. That's going to be big money in a couple of years. Do you agree?
As long as you're selective about what you buy, I think that is true. I'm kind of not the one to encourage people to view guitars as investments. I tend to think that you buy what you like, and if it goes up and you buy the right thing, all the better. I do think that now the stock market has taken a big dump, and sometimes that causes people to want to put their money into hard goods, things that they can look at. So I've also seen that the market has been very cyclical in the near 40 years I've done it, that things go up and they go down. It kind of comes in and out of vogue, but I think you pointed out that traditionally these guitars do tend to increase in value because there's such demand for them worldwide.
Right. And there's, as we said in the very first episode, that to know where something is going, you have to know where it's been. Well, these guitars have been there. You know what I mean? They've been there. And it's important to say, well, you know, there's always going to be a market for these guitars, you know,
Right.
and it's important that you know what that market is. Yeah, you fall in love with a guitar. You might as well fall in love with a guitar that's going to go somewhere value-wise.
Right, sure.
One of the things, as far as when we talk about this, just a little bit above the sweet spot, a brand that's kind of hovering there and it doesn't seem to move is Paul Reed Smith. Now, since you're a Maryland guy, you've probably been a dealer since the beginning, right?
Well, honestly, I was not one of the first ones. I didn't open my brick and mortar store until 91, and Paul had been around since 85 and well before that privately, you know, building by himself. But when I opened my store and being aware of vintage instruments, and I'd see Paul's guitars coming in that he had made himself, I thought there's got to be a market for these. So I began to buy them, and I got clients all over the world buying them. The PRS thing, in terms of their vintage guitars, they did very well up until the recession of, I guess, 97, 98. And all guitars seem to have taken, you can tell me better than I can, but all vintage guitars took a big hit in that timeline. But Fender, Martin, Gibson, they all came back. PRS.
They returned, within 3 years.
Yeah.
The blue chip stuff was back. But PRS, it kind of held. And then after 2008, it took 15 years, really. And it was just last year that some of the, what we call the most collectible PRS guitars started moving again.
We did, I think, push that market a little bit because we were local and were able to buy a lot of them and then began to make it. There was a point in time where a 1985 Paul Reed Smith custom with birds in vintage yellow would fetch 20,000 and more.
Right.
Probably, maybe even 25. I'd have to go back and look through some of our records. And a lot of those guitars that I sought so heavily, people call me now and I'm no longer interested because they haven't really held their value and come back. Now, an exception to that would be Dragons, certain signatures, and some of the pre-factory guitars that Paul built. It's just, you know, for one reason or another, I guess the market didn't have confidence in them. And who knows, they may come storming back. I don't have a crystal ball.
Last year was kind of like where I saw things start steering and moving. And you introduced me to J.D. McDonald, who's now, he's actually on the advisor committee for the book. And because I want real PRS numbers. And he basically said that very first 85 Custom 24, the yellow one, finally started moving again. And it almost doubled, tripled in price since in the beginning of the pandemic. And the Dragons as well. But a lot of the Custom 24s and stuff, they're holding. And, you know, I get a lot of email from PRS people like, hey, you know, how come this is only listed at this? How come it's only listed at that? And I say, you know, you got to be patient. But they really didn't bounce back the way all the other blue chip stuff did. For sure. They
didn't. It's kind of like Gretsch's. I don't think Gretsch's have gone up at all in 10 years.
Except for the White Falcon.
Right, except for the Falcon.
I always feel bad because, you know, I'm such a Fender Gibson guy. I know everything there is about Fenders and Gibsons. There is a whole brotherhood of Gretsch guitar lovers. And they're like, well, you know, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, you're right. So I'm going to, in the second season, I'm going to do in-depth stuff about Rickenbackers and Gretsch's because there is a lot of love that can be given there. And there are people that are just as passionate about those guitars as we are about our Fenders and Gibsons.
Right.
There's actually quite a few guitars that you sell that are favorites. You have a lot of clients that love stuff, and you sell a lot of flat tops, and you sell a lot of the P90 stuff, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And those are like, to me, I always tell people, those are the guitars, man. Now, another thing you do, like you have an old school kind of a dealer where you go on what they call the guitar safari. I remember watching you go, I think it was last year, you went on a nice safari. Tell me about some of the best finds you've found on these, just where you just go out and look.
Well, not to give too much away, but I usually, I like to travel. I like to travel. I like to meet people. I like to see the country. There's that begins there. And I also, obviously, I'm in a business where I like to profit by buying something I can sell for more than I pay for it. So oftentimes I will, through whatever efforts, find an instrument in a certain locale that I consider to be an anchor. And when I say it's an anchor,
it's worth going there.
It's worth that one guitar. The profit will pay for my expenses to go do the trip. So, I'm amazed. Gary Dick says you never know until you go. And that's the truth. You don't know what's out there until you start poking around. But I think one of my most memorable ones that I always come up with is that I was in North Carolina and I was kind of bored, and I talked to Kim Shoemaker and a couple other guitar dealers that I knew down there. What's going on? Is there anything for sale? I looked in. At the time there was a rag called the I think it was called the Penny Saver, and I picked up the Penny Saver and I looked at it, and there was an ES330 advertised for roughly twice what the market was going on those guitars, and he said an ES330 1959 Sunburst. And I talked to Kim, and he said, yeah, that guy's crazy what he's asking for that. So I was bored in my hotel room, so I called the guy. And I said, well, what kind of P90s in it? He said, what do you mean? I said, the pickups themselves. What do they look like? Are they silver? Are they nickel? Or are they black? And he said, oh, no, they're chrome. I think they're chrome. And I said, oh, cool. And I said, can you explain what they look like? He goes, well, they're rectangular. And I said, they're rectangular. And I said, okay. Well, you've called it sunburst. I said, you've called the guitar sunburst. Can you describe what kind of sunburst? Is it reddish? Is it got a little bit of tobacco in it? What does it actually look like? And he said, oh, no. It's like a golden color. And he said, but you can see the sunshine coming through it. Like, okay. So I said, well, I'm very interested in it. He was in Kannapolis, North Carolina, and I was in Wilmington. And I hopped in my car. It's probably 6:30 at night, and I met him in a hotel room. He walks in the door with a case cover over a case, opened the case, unzipped the case cover, opened it, pink-lined lifting case, dead mint 59 dot neck, and the flamiest top you've ever seen in blonde, ES335 TD. That was one of the best ones. So I bought that for essentially, double the price of what a 330 should go for, but significantly less than what I sold it for. And I've been fortunate in that I've owned a dozen bursts in my life, and one of which walked in. There have been three of them that walked in my store. I have been on trips before and had someone call me with a lead on a burst and bought one. I bought one in California and made a couple of inquiries, and I drove it like 10 hours the next day to deliver it to a client who bought it. So, I've been very fortunate, Bill. I have to tell you, I'm very thankful for all the opportunities I've gotten. I've been fortunate to know some great people, find some great guitars. And not only that, I've done this for 40 years, so I know where a lot of things are. I'll sit down and look at the map sometimes, go, oh, yeah, I sold a guitar to that. And I'll start looking through my records, and sometimes I can find that person and that guitar and call them up. Hey, you interested in selling? Yeah, maybe. What are you offering? So that happens too. And by virtue of the fact that you've done it for a long time.
I always, people always talk about the stuff they sell that they wish they didn't sell, but that's how you keep your store moving. That's how you keep, that's how you grow your business. So, you sell this one, you buy that one, you sell that one. And that's kind of the thing. Like I personally can't get rid of any guitar because I love every guitar. And, especially my amps. People always want to buy my amps. And I'm like, I can't. I'm still in love with that thing. And, I guess, come to my funeral and bring your checkbook and, and I'm sure my wife might, but that's just the thing is that there's just a love for this vintage gear. And nowadays it's kind of like everything is so expensive. And that's kind of like when we talk today, I'm like, there are quite a few really, really nice guitars that beat the stock market in the last 10 years, last 20 years. And, look for these and examples. Like, I guess I sent you some spreadsheets there, like a Jackson from 1980s, 84 with the Floyd Rose. It's about $6,000, but that thing, it doubles in price every 5 years.
Wow.
And Jackson's now, that's that part of that emerging market. That $10,000 up to $10,000 is emerging market, $5,000 to $10,000. And those Jacksons that have the Floyd Rose they're popping there. They're moving. They have a return rate that's better, much better than the stock market. I think we've talked on a previous show about the Ibanez Model 2459 Destroyer from the lawsuit era. That's another one that doubles in price every 5 years. The Hamers, the 1985, the second, not the earliest ones, but the standards come out of the mid 80s. Those are coming up on $10,000 now. The 70s ones they're now double that. But man, you go to guitar shows now, you see those standards from the 80s, and if they have nice tops, boy, that's something. Look for those things, right? That's a great guitar. And another one is, although Music Man isn't something that drives the vintage market, the Eddie Van Halen model from 1991, the ones that he designed, those are moving. Those are over $5,000 now.
Oh yeah.
And there's like certain colors that command a lot of money. $10,000 for some of the ones that are purple or the ones that are black. Mm-hmm. The Ibanez, the Gem Y2K DNA, that one beat the stock market. That one, again, that doubles in price or has doubled in price every 6 years. Another one, which is kind of like, I think you've seen this one, is that Electric 12. The Fender Electric 12 has really jumped. And especially if you can get it in a color, get it in a nice common color or a vintage, rare color. That's now a guitar that, has beats the stock market every year for sure. And of course, Flying V's from the 70s. I think I'm going to do a whole show on the triangle knob Flying V's. Those beat the stock market. The Guilds, we talked about Guild in the previous shows as a sleeper. That Bluegrass Special, the D50, that's one. I think you guys have those every once in a while. Mm-hmm. That's another one that has a 10% return rate. Incredible Bluegrass Special D50s. Do you guys, how do you see Guild right now?
I like Guild 12 strings, and I like I like some of their flat tops. Honestly, if one walks in the door, I generally don't try to buy it. I try to get somebody to consign it. Mm-hmm. Just because playing the smart money, waiting for things that I know I can put money in that will turn quicker for me. I think they're fine guitars. They tend to be a little heavy, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. They're certainly great instruments, certainly as from a player's standpoint.
Do you, as far as flat tops, you guys have a lot of Martins?
We do like to get Martins.
And do they just walk in, or do you have to actually go out hunting for those?
Both. Both. I mean, I look for them when I can see them, and I love pre-war stuff. And we just finished a conversion on a C3. I believe it's a 33 C3 that we converted to an OM28. We had we bought from a luthier that had been around about 50 years. We bought a bunch of old tops from the 60s that he had gotten as a Martin authorized repair guy, and we retopped the C3, put a herringbone and a sunburst on it. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty great sounding guitar, despite the fact that the top on it has never been on a guitar before.
A beautiful guitar, I bet. I looked on your website last night. I was like going through, and I saw that you guys had one of the old K Barney Kessels, the Kleenex box. That's a beautiful guitar. Mm-hmm.
Very stylish.
That thing with the refrigerator.
I'm really surprised that guitar's still here.
Yeah, I mean, I remember looking for those because anybody can get a Gibson Barney Kessel. It's really hard to find the K with the refrigerator headstock and the Kleenex box. But that was in beautiful shape.
Yes, it's a nice one. Very nice one.
Hi, it's Rick from Garrett Park Guitars, and we are proud to sponsor this podcast. You can find us on the web at gpguitars.com. We buy everything from large collections down to 1 and 2 pieces.
At Strings by Mail, we have the strings you need to hit all the right notes. Choose from over 6,000 strings from 75 manufacturers. Use our string filter or call one of our expert players to help find your perfect set. Your music, your strings delivered fast. Strings by Mail.
It's funny because when back in the early days, before I even opened my shop, I would go to guitar shows. One of the famous ones was the New York Guitar Show that was put on by Skip Henderson. It was in a church in the East Village. It was kind of grungy and kind of crazy, and people piled up on each other, but you would not have believed the guitars that came in there. It was nuts. But back in the day, for one reason or another, I was looking for pedals. I was buying 2 Screamers and Vox Wawas and Octavias and the Univibes and on and on and on. And while people would be scrounging around when the show opened to find guitars, I'd be looking for boxes of pedals, and really made a market in that for a long time. That was kind of a fun thing to do.
Has it blown your mind how vintage pedals have just exploded?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm sure you've done a comparison on how, they performed. But, back in the day, an 808 was, $250, $300 and less. And now I think they're commanding 2-3 times that.
And it's one of those things where, I know people that buy these things because it is a tube screamer, and then they're very unhappy with it because it's like a lot of old vintage pedals. Not all of them sound good, but if you find the right one, I have my feelers out there. I know people that are out there, and I said, when you find the one, that actually sounds really good, call me.
Sure. Another thing, Bill, too, when I buy, a lot of times I buy on instinct, and my kind of rule is if I like it, I bet somebody else will. So I've done a lot of purchasing of obscure kind of things in the past that end up being a real good hit, just because I thought, that's cool. Somebody else will think so too.
What's something that you bought that surprised you that it sold so quickly you couldn't believe it?
Oh, there's been a lot of those. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I guess maybe, it's like you mentioned some of the San Dimas Charvels.
Oh, yeah.
I've gotten those, because we buy collections. We just bought out a 168-piece collection, and there was a BC Rich Mockingbird in it. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll take that. I knew that bitches and 10 strings were worth a lot of money, but, man, that thing sold in a New York minute. Gone.
Yeah, you wonder, like, oh, did I underprice?
Yeah, and it's, first of all, I don't know everything. I'll tell you that right from the first. I know plenty of people that I can call and I can get, it's like a phone a friend. I can call this one or that one to get an opinion on something. And I'm the first one to admit I don't know everything, but I have a sense for what I do know. And, I'm fortunately been successful at it.
This year, electric arch tops really went up. For years and years, our ES 175s were kind of, they sat around. But this year, because they don't make them. What do you think about those, the old 175s, ES 175s?
I don't know. I'm a little selective. I like 175s. If I get a PAF one or a P91, I'm certainly going to buy it. And you're right. They do sell. But arch tops in general tend to be slow for me because I guess we just don't make a market in them. I do sell them, but and frankly, our website, and we've been around a long time, things surprise me sometimes. Put them up for sale, and I go, oh, okay. Well, I didn't think that would sell. Once again, I go, what do I know?
The Firebirds. What do you think about the Gibson Firebirds?
I love them. I always tell people to go play one first before you buy it.
Right.
Because they're not for everybody. The headstock is a mile away from you, and it's got a very long neck on it that sits way off the body. But I think they're fantastic. They sound great. I just sold an Ember Red 64 and 3, and I sold it to a studio owner, and he's raving about how it sounds recorded.
Oh, yeah. To me, like there's tone machines, and the right Firebird is an absolute, like I think of like Jimmy Wallace when I hear him play. That's like to me, there are certain guitars that just have incredible tone. That's one of them. But every Firebird I've picked up and played, underwhelming. They couldn't set them up right. They were just not set up. There is a center of balance kind of issue. It's if you're playing a Telecaster and you play something like that, it's going to throw you off. You're going to be playing in the wrong key the whole night.
Well, you will get remembered if you play one. That's for dang sure.
And you'll blow people's mind. You will blow the hats off people. You just boom. You think of Johnny Winter, and there's a reason why he could do that. And it was that reverse humbuck. Or that with that body through the neck. Neck through the body. Bang. That thing just growled. And those, nowadays you can get. They're up there. They're above that sweet spot. But you can find the reverse ones with the mini hums. You can get those in strike. Those are good if you play them. But we always say you check the neck. Play it. Make sure you like it.
Yeah, right. I just I'm actually negotiating with a guy right now to buy a 64 Firebird 7 and a 66 Firebird 1.
I think any of the single pickup Les Pauls Juniors and stuff like that the Firebird 1s, I always liked those simple, gut wrenching. I think the 7 would be tough for me because it would be hard to figure out what you're going to do with it. But I don't have a Firebird in my collection, and I always ask, I call around around, and someday it'll fall in my lap.
Sure.
Who knows? Let's talk about hummingbirds and doves.
Love them.
This year, hummingbirds, especially those really early ones, the first ones, bang, they were way up there this year. We're talking people paying over $10K now for hummingbirds. And how rare are they to get the earliest ones now?
Well, I don't know how rare they are. I mean, I think that one of the things is, it's 2024. People have been doing this now for well over 50 years. I mean, I know some guys that started in the 70s. You got to figure that a lot of those guitars are not coming out because they're deep in someone's collection. So as far as the numbers, I think you could probably look at the Gibson log and determine, how many they made. But they're really phenomenal instruments. Mm-hmm. Some of those doves and hummingbirds just sound crazy. I think that they made the hummingbird the first year was 59 or 60, and I recently had a gorgeous one that sold in like a second. Like I think it was a 60. Mm-hmm. And great story. The guy had contacted me, wanted to sell it. He was in Ohio, and he had priced it, and we negotiated on the price, and we agreed on a price. And after he hung up with me, probably 2 or 3 other people called and said, "I will come over and give you way more." And he said, "Nope, I've already agreed on the deal. The guy's coming to get it." And I naturally paid him a little more than we'd agreed on for that privilege. But you don't see that too often anymore, mm-hmm. where people are willing to kind of stick by what they negotiated on.
Right. Now, they basically came as a natural, and they came with a beautiful red. Is there a price difference are people willing to pay more for the naturals?
I think it's red's more valuable, isn't it?
I don't know. I think I have them priced the same for both. But I see more. I've seen mostly the red. Like that. I think that was the one I see the most. And then that every once in a while, or maybe I'm back. Maybe I could be. I'm sorry. I might be even backwards on that one. I'll have to check into that. But the red, I think, is a beautiful one. I know that most of the mid '60s ones are red. Right. You saw the naturals in the early '60s.
I think the burst one is more valuable.
Okay. And then the doves, hardly see those. Are they just super, super rare?
Yeah, I would guess that there are fewer of those than the hummingbirds. That's just a guess. I haven't, probably in my life, have probably not owned more than a dozen doves of any ilk. So mm-hmm. I'm probably not the person to ask on that.
Right. Now, let's talk Gretches. Like, do you sell a lot of Gretches? Do you have a lot of Gretches in your vintage side?
No.
Why is that?
Well, they don't sell, and the expectation is that people, when they're selling them, they feel like, oh, it ought to be worth this, and what it's worth and how long it's going to take to sell it are two different things. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of picky about what I buy, and I always like to get original stuff that's clean. I mean, obviously everybody does, but they just not perform well for me. And like you say, it's usually like the White Falcon, the mm-hmm. Vertical logo White Falcon is always going to be a good choice. I don't know. For me, they haven't done well.
It's interesting that when you think about vintage guitars, how pre-CBS Fender 65 Stratocasters are now $25K and up. But as far as the Gretches, except for that White Falcon and that White Penguin, they're always going to be sub 10K, most of the time. Mm-hmm. But people love that White Falcon if you can get the right years for that one. Even through the late 60s, people love them, and they're great sounding guitars.
Well, I think the Stern Masterville stuff is really nice, too, the newer ones.
Yeah. He's doing a great job. And I know that Custom Shop, they make some one-of-a-kinds that sell instantly. People love them. Mm-hmm. And they'll play better than anything ever made in that they're emulating, right. For sure. Now, what about Rickenbackers? Do you see a lot of Rickenbackers come in the store?
Yeah, I like Ricks. I mean, obviously. I love a 360 12-string. They just are, there's nothing that sounds like them. And they have a mm-hmm. capacitor that you can take out of them that takes a lot of the high end out of them. Mm-hmm. And they're a little more versatile. But, gosh, man, that's the sound of the birds. And
yeah, that's the sound of as they say, the 60s.
Tom Petty. I love those guitars.
Now, you play in a band, right?
I do.
What do you play? What guitar do you play when you're playing?
Oh, God. I'm a heretic. I play a guitar that was made locally by a guy named Eric Johnson. And Eric grew up with Joe Knaggs, obviously of Knaggs Guitars and Paul Reed Smith fame. They all kind of lived in this tight little area of Bowie, Maryland, and knew each other. Anyway, Eric makes these guitars one at a time in his garage. And, it's lightweight. It's got a Strat scaling. It really it looks like a PRS hollow body. It's lightweight. Mm-hmm. I have 2 Holmes pickups in it, and Strat scale length strings through the back ebony board.
I mean, that sounds like a great guitar. Like has everything that you want.
It is. It's light too. You know, my back after 2-3 sets starts to feel it. And I also play a TV Junior, and I have a 65 Strat that I really like that has a 3-way switch in it. Sorry, 5-way switch in it. So I take that out for versatility. But I probably play my E.S. Johnson more than anything else, and secondarily either the Strat or a TV Junior.
The 65 Strat, is it a refin or is it an actual?
No, it's a burst. It's an original burst.
Oh, so you walk it in and you sit with it, right? It sits next to you and drinking your beers.
But listen, I played a burst in a biker bar a couple of years ago. My wife was about to lose her mind, but I had driven it back. I bought a burst out in Colorado, and I drove it back to our house in Florida. And my friend was playing at a local biker bar, and I took it over to show him and got up and sat in with him for a minute.
Well, the thing is, nobody's going to think it's a real, like, you up there with that 65, they'll say, oh, it's just a custom shop.
That's right.
I remember way back, I hadn't played guitar for a while. I was collecting, but I hadn't really been playing. And I remember we were doing a show, Psychedelic Moods, we were doing a show where we split the stage. It was during one of the rock and roll marathons. And the guy that was in the band that we were sharing the stage with, he was playing this old beat up Stratocaster. And I was, good for you. I was so proud of this. I was like, good for you for having the guts to bring out your, because it was a maple neck. And then he's like, oh no, this is a road relic. I was like, oh, okay. And then that's when I started figuring out or learning about these guitar companies were making old looking guitars. And I was like, oh, okay. So I start, I play refriends and just pretend, that if anybody asks, it's a custom shop, Yeah. I don't, but I was just like, I couldn't believe that somebody was relicing guitars,
I kind of have mixed feelings about relics. I mean, it does enable people to play an instrument that has kind of the feel and certainly the appearance of an older one. I'm also kind of of the school of thought that you should relic it yourself. Right. But, I can certainly see both sides of it.
And the thing with the relics too is it gives you like that feel, it feels like the real thing. It doesn't necessarily sound like, when I used to get custom shop guitars and was using them on stage, I was putting old pickups in them thinking that I might be able to emulate the more vintage sound. And it's not, it's the wood. It turns out that it's really the wood. You could put the best pickups in the worst sounding wood and it's just not going to sound right. That's when I just started using refinished guitars on stage, just because I wanted that feel of the neck that was old, real old, and I needed that 50-year-old ash,
Well, that's where conversions come in too, right?
Yep.
When people make a burst conversion, that it's about the old wood.
And it's amazing how, like when you talk about what it costs to actually do a conversion, to use non-plastine lacquer, to use the hide glue, to use this, to use that. It cost that guy $20,000 to $30,000, to make that guitar.
Sure.
You can't build an old guitar. You have to, use the old this and the old that, and the old hardware. So but that's a big market now, right? That whole conversion market is huge.
It is.
Often I see people selling them $40K. People easily buying them $40K.
Oh, sure.
And they're beautiful. They do a nice job with the maple tops. Every gold top has that beautiful maple top underneath it.
Exactly.
Well, some do. Most do. I'm surprised.
Unless they're all mahogany.
Yeah, and then you can paint it black and just be done with it.
Right.
As far as where do you see like that mid-range market? Do you see it kind of hanging there, or do you see it going up a little bit? Do you see it going down? What do you think's going? I know everybody always asks that.
Well, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I mean, I think that it's the law of supply and demand. If people are looking for, and I love it when people buy a quote unquote inexpensive vintage piece to kind of stick their big toe in the market, because you do see the differences, you appreciate it, and there's an intrinsic thing that goes along with having a desirable instrument. I tell people that all the time. It's the way they play, it's the way they sound, it's the way they look, but it's also the way it makes you feel when you're playing it. So mid-level or otherwise, I think that getting the right thing, getting it at a fair, reasonable price, I think is always going to be a good model.
If somebody came to you and says, I really, really, really want a Martin. I want the best Martin I can get for about $10,000. What would you bring out for them?
Probably, I would say Brazilian rosewood from the 60s. If you can get a 68 or 69, something that's late in the run, I think those guitars, and they may have even gone well over 10 now. I think that staying at something like that in that range, and it depends on what style you want too. A 00028 is, or 21s are also a D21 or a 00021. Those are good guitars too because they used a lesser grade aesthetically of rosewood to make those than they did the 28 models and the 35s and the 45s. So they're just as good sounding, but they're not as much money.
Right. There's the D28, and then there's the three-piece back Brazilian.
35.
The 35. And, a lot of people didn't realize that 35 was a great sounding guitar.
Oh, sure.
It was a Brazilian back, and it had, by that time, they didn't have big pieces of Brazilian. They had to do a three-piece, not a two-piece. But that's a great guitar, and that's a great investment today. But I think, you're right. Anything that was made late 60s, still got the Brazilian rosewood. It's just a great investment, and it's a great sounding guitar. You're just not gonna be unhappy with that. When it comes to acoustic guitars, the big difference between acoustic guitars and electric guitars is the repairs you're going to expect on a Martin or a flat top Gibson. What kind of repairs do you think don't really affect the value that much?
Well, a neck reset really, in my opinion, never hurt. Number one, if you can't play it, what good does it do you?
Right.
If it's not playable. And to a certain extent, I think the same is true for refrets. It's got to be, an instrument's got to be able to be played in order to, to enjoy it and for it to have any increase in value. I think it's going to have to be repaired. Certain cracks are a no-no. A big crack in the face, boy, it's just, I don't know, it can be repaired, but it certainly, the guitar is going to take a hit because of it. And that's also true for big repairs. And one thing that I think is the kiss of death is removing and replacing a bridge plate, because as much as anything else, that contributes to the structure and the tone of the guitar. There's a lot of little nuances to all these, but refrets don't seem to bother them.
Nope.
Neck resets are, necessary. Crack repairs to a lesser degree, they certainly are going to hurt the value in some way.
I guess good advice would be look for a 50s Martin that's had a little bit of, like one of these repairs that doesn't change the tone or the playability of that guitar, but it makes it more playable. That's a guitar that will always be worth something, at least what you pay for it. I love finding stuff that, just has minimal repair that's at a really nice price, and it's just a great guitar that keeps that guitar alive, As far as Birdlands, what do you think about Birdlands?
Short scale, doesn't appeal to everybody. Kind of a cool guitar. I think it's a niche guitar. There are many people that are fans of them, and I think that if you're looking for that genre of guitar, a lot of people are going to look for something else, a 175 or something with a full scale length.
Well, the 175, you get about a little under the stock market return. For a Birdland, you're basically not even beating inflation.
I believe it.
But I have that ES 350T. I love that guitar. I don't play it a lot, but it's got something. It's got something magic that happens. So it's just fun. It's, it's like everything. You go around and you find something you love, and you don't want to ever get rid of it.
Right.
But
understood. Yeah. That's certainly kept me in business.
Do you guys do a lot of Travis Bean? That's a quirky market, but it's a good market. It's a market that has a pretty nice return. It's hard to find them.
Right. Yeah. I don't see a lot of them out here.
Oh, what about the Steinberger?
Yeah. Same thing. It's not something I'm overly familiar with. It's just not in my wheelhouse.
If you're a Steinberger collector, it's kind of interesting that like the earliest, like 1984 versions, they double in price about every 10 years. So it's not like you're buying something that's going to be like a silver tone. It's just going to stay. It is an interesting thing. I remember when those first came out, I remember one of my buddies had one, and I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Where's your tradition? Where's your tradition?
Right. So, I don't consider those to be vintage instruments.
No, but they are. They're built in 1984.
Well, that's not my cutoff either.
No. What is your cutoff for vintage? Like when you say I like vintage guitars, what's your category for vintage?
I think the early 70s. The whole vintage market started in the first place because manufacturers were making shitty guitars. Then all of a sudden, that old guitar. I want to feel like my old one. I don't want a 1 9/16 inch nut width, and you had bean counters that were driving production on guitars and designing guitars. It just didn't make any sense.
Right.
Now, that doesn't say I won't buy them.
Yeah. Nowadays, that 3-bolt Strat is expensive,
Sure.
But, like for me, like, I was always a snob. Oh, 3-bolt. And then, like, I'll tell Robin Trower that, tell Richie Blackmore that, think of all the rock and roll songs that were recorded with 3-bolt neck Strats.
Yeah, I mean, how many times did Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page say, I've got to have that flatter radius,
Yeah.
How many times did they say those things? And they just went out and made music with what they had.
Yeah, I do know that there is like a 70 Strat when they go to the flat pole pieces again. I know they kind of lose a lot of their.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think the Stratocaster guy, I always tell people, look for those 3-bolt Strats, the early ones. They're great sounding guitars, and that was listen to Robin Trower, Bridge of Sigh. You think that's not a good tone guitar? Listen to the stuff that was made with them.
Well, a real good rule of thumb is listen to yourself. Listen to your ears. Mm-hmm. Don't necessarily listen to what everybody else is saying, and play something. If you like the way it sounds, you like the way it plays, fine. Mm-hmm. I know plenty of terrific players that are using whatever, and it's all about what's in their fingers. Right.
Always is. It's funny, like when you look at the very first Stevie Ray Vaughan album cover, he's playing the stringy sound in that picture.
Yeah, he was playing a Tokai.
Yeah, a stringy sound. That's what he was playing. He wasn't playing a Stratocaster. So, but I think he recorded it with a Stratocaster. I don't know. It just, that always cracks me up. People always, these snobs that say, well, I don't, 3-bolt, 4-bolt. It's true that value-wise, that you do lose a lot of value as you transition through the 70s, but great guitars all along. Always can find great guitars from any era. You can find the lemons from the early areas too, the golden era as well. There are some duds out there, but you got to play it. You got to love it. So
absolutely. It's all about, what feels good to you.
Well, I guess I've taken up as much of your time as you're probably busy today, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. It's good talking to you. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. I know a lot of people do.
Oh, I love it. It's called labor of love. I get to talk guitars all day long with people on the phones. They always say, well, who the guys to go to? I go, well, there's great guys out there, and your name always comes up when I say the nicest guys in the guitar business.
Thank you.
People come to you all the time, say, hey, Ram told me, give you a call about this or about that. And so.
How'd you get your nickname, Ram?
That's my real name, Ram.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, I'm an Indian. My real name is Ram Tuli, but William's my middle name. So most, people call me both. People are listening to this podcast going, how come some guys call him Bill, some guys call him Ram? It's just how long I've known you and where I know you from and whatnot. My author name is Ram. I figured that I'd probably sell more books with a name like Ram Tuli than I would as a Bill Tuli. But on social media, I'm Bill Tuli. Most people know me as Bill Tuli. So I guess that's like where people know me from. So.
Good to know, man. I never knew.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, I went to get my Social Security card, and I filled out my Social Security application, and the lady says, no, you got to use your real name, because I put Bill William Tuli. And the lady's like, nah. And so she looks at my birth certificate, because your name is Ram William Tuli. I was like, oh, I thought that was pretty cool. I was named after my grandfather. And I went home, and I was like, I was proud of that name. That was a good name. That was my name in the Navy. Most people knew me as Ram. I was right on. In my playing days, I was Howlin' Ram. Instead of Howlin' Wolf, I was Howlin' Ram. That was nice. They're T-Bone Tuli or Howlin' Ram.
I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story that'll probably get me in trouble.
Nah, we can cut it out. We can delete it.
Okay, well, you might want to cut it. But Paul Smith was Paul Smith until he and his buddy got busted breaking into the pool. And a police officer said, what's your name, son? He goes, Paul Smith. And he goes, yeah, okay, what's your real name? He goes, that's my real name. He goes, where do you live? He said, I live blah, blah, blah. So he said, I'm going to take you home. He goes, okay, you're going to hear it from my old man. So soon thereafter, he took on, I believe it was his grandmother's name, and became Paul Reed.
I'd like to talk to him. I'm going to try to talk with him just to learn more about PRS.
Well, he loves vintage guitars.
Yeah.
He comes over all the time, and we just sold him a nice Junior recently.
In fact, I'll call him and say, you told me to call him.
All right, go ahead. See how far that gets you.
Yeah. All right, Rick, I can't thank you enough. This was a lot of fun.
All right, Mr. Bill Ram. It's good talking to you too, pal.
All righty. We'll talk to you later. All right.
Take care, man. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. If you have any questions you want to ask about all the podcasts we're putting up or podcasts you want to hear in the future, send me an email at ram@vintageguitar.com. I'll answer any of your questions. I'll fit these questions in with the shows we're doing. We had a great feedback about shows people want to hear or topics that we discussed, and we're going to try to start addressing those as we go from here. Any message you want to send me, ram@vintageguitar.com. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment on this podcast. Thank you.
At Strings by Mail, we have the strings you need to hit all the right notes. Choose from over 6,000 strings from 75 manufacturers. Use our string filter or call one of our expert players to help find your perfect set. Your music, your strings delivered fast. Strings by Mail.
Hi, it's Rick from Garrett Park Guitars, and we are proud to sponsor this podcast. You can find us on the web at gpguitars.com. We buy everything from large collections down to 1 and 2 pieces.